Hi, so welcome. My name is Hsiao. Um, I'm the founder of InPlay, and our goal is to boost access to expanded learning time to minimize learning loss. The need has never been greater. Engagement with distance learning is really uneven, and kids really just miss engaging in person with their peers and adults. So expanded learning time is needed, but will summer actually happen? Last year, InPlay listed programs from over 900 provider organizations. But we're seeing this summer that a lot of them have put things on hold until they hear whether they will be allowed to open, when will the shelter in place be lifted, and what are the new rules around health and safety that may be required. So we want to give these providers additional info so that they can decide whether to reopen in-person site-based programs this summer. Today, our goal is to shed some light on what is likely to be required and hear directly from many out-of-school time leaders who have actually been implementing the new health and safety laws or rules. What will programs look like? Any lessons or surprises that other providers can learn from? So I'd like to introduce our panel tonight. I have Mara Wold, who's the regional lead for Region 5 for the California Department of Education, the Expanded Learning Time Division, or Expanded Learning Division. So she oversees Santa Clara County, Santa Cruz, San Benito, and Monterey counties. We also have Lucille Gabriel, who's the Program Director for Youth and Family Services at the YWCA for Silicon Valley. She's currently running 3 centers and serving about 120 students. And finally, we have Daniel Koba. He's the Executive Director for Youth Development at the YMCA Silicon Valley. And he currently oversees about 300 employees and volunteers and runs day camps, summer camps, as well as licensed child care centers. And we also have Nancy Cole, who is assisting us with the recording. So if I could just ask each one of you just to start out and say, what are you doing differently as a result of COVID-19 that you weren't doing before? Do either of you want to, Mara?
Sure, I'll jump in. I'm just chuckling because I seem to be Zooming a lot. Zoom calls are the thing. That's certainly a big difference in this time of COVID. And, you know, while it's very hard for those of us who are in youth development fields because we tend to want to give people hugs, at least I know I'm a huggy person and I want to connect with people directly. We're still finding ways and managing to have that connectivity virtually. So that's a big difference. It's a big change, of course, and shift for everyone. But I'm delighted to be here and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mara. Lucille?
I'm going to echo that same sentiment. I don't want to say the integrated, but I guess the frequency of technology right now in our programs is something very new because all of our interactions in the youth programs are face-to-face with parents, with children. And so, you know, even though we're open, it's just a limited scope. And because of all of the new protocols, it's a very different interaction. So it's our new normal that we're trying to get used to, but, you know, still distant. So it's, you know, air high fives and air hugs as opposed to
Yes.
actual hugs. And the kids are like, okay, you know, so it took them a while to get used to that and us because it's just normal.
Yeah, it's a strange time. How about you, Daniel?
You know, this time has definitely been very different than our regular time, but I want to talk about the positive things that have been coming out, at least in the youth development world as we're trying to figure this out. I feel that it's forced us to get out of our silos and really ask the questions. We know no one has the exact answer to any of these questions. And so I've been very fortunate to be able to have a lot of conversations with providers that I've known for a long time and those that are just picking up the phone and calling. And so I think one of the silver linings, I'll say, has been the collaborative work that I've been feeling as we're all trying to figure out what these next steps are in forums like this. So thank you for hosting this.
Well, thank you for joining. So the overall arching question here is, what should expanding learning time providers prepare for as social distancing restrictions and school closures are lifted? So with that, I'd like to actually kick it off by asking Mara, since you have your ear to the ground, you're getting lots of guidance from the state, and I'm sure from all the counties that you oversee. And you also lead the after-school collaborative for Santa Clara County. So what are the changes that you see coming down, being mandated on out-of-school time providers?
Well, it's a complex question only because we have a lot of guidelines, obviously, that are coming down from the CDC and our local public health departments that are really dictating whether or not the shelter in place can be lifted, when it can be lifted, and then, of course, all the guidelines that go along with it. And I know a little bit later I have a slide that just pinpoints some of the highlights of the CDC guidelines, but relative to our after school providers really contemplating whether or not they should open their doors or not, there is a lot to consider, because it's not just the health and safety of workers themselves. It's also the children who are in the program, and of course the parents and caregivers who are also interacting with the staff. As well as the willingness and ability of schools, for example, and other community facilities to actually open their doors and provide this space. So there's complexity all around with this question and with this issue, which so many of our providers, of course, are grappling with right now. And I would just echo what Danny said. It's an opportunity for us to actually collaborate in ways that we haven't maybe had a chance to collaborate like it before. And I would say with the Santa Clara County After School Collaborative, we're a highly collaborative group. But these kind of conversations, I think, elevate the depth and breadth of our relationships with one another. We need each other to be able to do this and do it well and do it right. And there's never before has been a time where we really need to share resources, share information, and really put our heads together to make sure that we're providing the best possible and safest possible experience for everybody.
Yeah. So, Nancy, I was going to say, why don't you show those guidelines? So,
yeah, this is
1 to 10 staff to student ratio. Wow.
Yeah. So, generally speaking, and just so folks on this call know, and for those who may be viewing this recording, my role is a regional lead for Region 5 Expanded Learning. We are an arm of the Department of Education Expanded Learning Division, providing support to grantees who receive public dollars. So state ACES money, California has the After School Education and Safety Program. We also administer through the state our 21st Century Learning Centers program for summer. It's our only source of dollars for summer. Also, it's the only source of funding for high school assets programs. And so what's interesting to note about this, and what's particularly challenging for the agencies and districts who receive these public dollars, is that we are under typically a guideline of 1 to 20 staff student ratio. Mm-hmm. And so with these new guidelines, looking at the 1 to 10 staff and student ratio, you can imagine the funding does not go as far as it normally would. And state funding has never been a fully funded program to begin with. Our programs receive $8.88 per kid per day to provide enrichment programming to youth. And other folks will know this too. In other states, it's $7.50 per kid per day for 21st Century. So we're already working with a limited number or limited amount of funding. And again, goes back to the point earlier about how important it is to really put our heads together, our resources together to provide a rich program. A 1 to 10 definitely changes things quite a bit in terms of the amount of students who could be served in an in-person setting. And along with that, and you can see here, these are pretty common. Folks are very much familiar with these guidelines by now, but temperature and wellness checks upon arrival, frequent hand washing, at least 20 seconds, singing the ABCs or whatever creative thing you can come up with by way of hand washing for 20 seconds, access to hand sanitizers, tissues, and no-touch trash cans. I mean, things that we haven't really been necessarily, we've sort of taken it for granted before, right? No sharing of meals, toys, games, or equipment, and understanding how important it is for that equipment to be cleaned after its use every single time. Things like asking parents and caregivers to bring their own pens for sign out, things we haven't necessarily had to think about before. That again is a source of potential transmission, and so making sure everyone's aware that that's a factor. And of course, maintaining the big one, social physical distancing of 6 feet apart, and altering physical space to maintain that environment when staff are working with youth. And now, of course, requiring cloth face coverings, masks for staff. So as best we can, we're trying to keep those groups of 1 to 10 small together. The same staff person is required to stay with that group of 10 at all times. And we're encouraging folks to make sure that siblings remain together, because that's really important. But you won't see, Danny or Lucille and I having a rotation of kids, for example. In our programming, it would be Danny with one group, I'm with another group, Lucille's with another group, and we're with that group constantly.
I was relieved to hear that the 6 county Bay areas are going to be actually trying to issue a framework perhaps by the end of this week. I don't know if you all heard that. And they included they loosened the requirement that the kids in the group of 10 aren't allowed to touch each other, because they just realized, that's just going to be impossible. So it seems like as long as you keep that cohort stable and they don't touch other 10 kids, they can actually wrestle with each other even. So
yeah,
we'll
and
see.
I think we're going to have more detail in the coming days and weeks. Another really, I think, important resource, of course, aside from the CDC, for sure, that's where we're getting all of our information. But I think the American Camp Association is another good source. I was just on their site earlier to see if they had uploaded additional detailed information. And as of yet, they haven't posted and made live some of their detailed information, but I know it's forthcoming. So I would really encourage folks to go there, because I know they'll be recording a lot of and uploading a lot of the information from CDC, but they're working very closely with organizations like the YMCA of the USA, because the Y runs tons of camps. And so anyway, more detail is forthcoming. I just would highly recommend that people, bookmark those pages, make sure to check back frequently, and keep your ears and eyes open for new information as it comes down.
Great. Well, let me, we've heard about some of the health and safety rules. I'd actually like to turn it to Lucille. You were one of the earliest licensed childcare providers that started offering services to essential workers. Tell us what it's like. What is it like when you really implement it? What were the most difficult parts of these rules to implement?
So the YWCA actually never closed. When all of the school districts started closing in March 13th, we stayed open to serve our regular families. And then when the new restriction came down for essential workers, March 31st, that's when we switched, because we were able to keep those group sizes. So we operate under the group size of 1 to 12. As opposed to the 1 to 10 ratio, because our cohorts are stable. And like we spoke on the phone, the biggest challenge is keeping those cohorts stable with the same staff, because we run 11 hours we've got 2 staff in there. And so if one of those staff happen to call out sick for the day or has a fever, they can't come to work because that's the guidelines. So then what do you do? So what we're finding is that we had to cross bridge those spaces and have 3 people, which, was alluded to earlier, that we really don't have the funding for that, but we really need 3 people to be able to bridge that gap for when people do call out, so that the cohort is still stable. And so that's been one of our toughest challenges. Also, the continuity, because of the essential worker staff, which is primarily our clients at this point, their schedules change. So you may have a classroom that I've now got 3 staff members in with only 3 children, which had 12 yesterday, but I can't move those kids around and I can't move that staff around. The groups have to stay the same. So that's been one of the most difficult things for us to do, because all of the other stuff really falls in line with community care licensing regulations and the CDE. We have to do our health checks anyway. Like the touchless garbage cans, that's a licensing requirement for us. So kids use their feet, they jump that through. So those types of pieces, hand washing happens every time you sneeze, you cough, touch an animal. So those pieces didn't really change. It was more about the ratio and keeping the group stable with the qualified staff.
Got it. And then when we talked by phone earlier, you also mentioned, though, that there were some parents who were reluctant to send their kids to child care centers.
Absolutely. Because we're finding that in our school age programs, like with the older children, because school is out, parents are okay with that. With our preschool 3 to 5, parents were still okay with that. The reluctancy came in with their infant toddler children, so kids or children at a year through under age 3. We saw dips in the enrollment because grandma could watch them, or some other family member, because they don't want their children potentially exposed. But then that also makes that difficult for us, because if the child is there every day, we're familiar with that germ pool. If they're with us on Monday and then with grandma or a neighbor on Tuesday and come back on Wednesday, even though they're stable in the group that we've provided, we have no idea what their interactions have looked like in the time that they were away. So it works twofold in that regard.
Okay. Thank you, Lucille. Daniel, does everything that Lucille said to you, does that resonate with you? Any differences?
No, I mean, again, I think a lot of us in the beginning portion of essential care and critical workers, and as the shelter-in-place order came in, quickly trying to figure out what needs to happen in order to make programs up and going. And I would agree with the initial adjustments. Things you learn very quickly is, on paper, setting groups of kids works perfectly. And in reality, when they don't show up, it becomes very clear that it's not an efficient way, but that's not the goal. And I think it's coming to terms that, for a lot of our organizations, whether they be for-profit or nonprofit or schools, funding is a major source of challenge for a lot of us. And so running efficiently is something that we have to do on a regular basis. And so, it really is changing the mindset of staff on what the goal is of what we're doing, and understanding that those changes are necessary in order to move forward and ensure that we create a safe environment. But yes, we experience very similar pieces. We have lots of days where we have, a 1-to-1 or a higher than 1-to-1 ratio because of that, the work changing, the work schedule changing. But I also think one of the other pieces that came, that was an unknown, is that we account, and I was speaking to Mara about this, all of our staffs, regardless of where they are in the youth development world, they have their innate activities and games and pieces that they know to their core, and they know they work with children. A lot of those particular pieces count on child-to-child interaction or staff-to-child to interaction. And when we ask the question to our staff, are you comfortable, really learning how to adjust these games under this new culture and this new environment? They felt pretty confident. And but in very quickly, we realized that there's a lot more support that staff need in terms of how to learn how to interact with children under these new rules and regulations, and how that looks a little bit different, and how to be creative with those particular components. The other thing that I learned through this piece is it's a hard time. And so whether it is the children inside of our program or the parents or our staff, there needs to be a lot of time built in during this time for empathy and understanding and listening. We've had parents who can't be with us anymore because they've lost their job, and these are real conversations that are happening now. And so, really, I feel that my team has done a great job of committing to ensuring that the time is there to have the conversation and just be there for each other during this difficult time. So I would agree with everything that was said, and I would just add those few pieces for us.
I want to follow up on that, Danny. Do you and Lucille, do you actually see any sort of behavioral changes from the students that you're serving?
Go ahead, Danny.
In terms of mental health issues, anxiety?
I think that in this, I think it'll be interesting. I think in our case, for our essential workers programs, we aren't necessarily seeing those same kids that we see in our regular YMCA programs. There's some crossover as they're coming through. So we have a lot of new kids coming in for this particular program, and in a new environment, in a time that is uncertain. Knowing that in our case, because the majority of our parents are healthcare workers, that their parents are working in a very vulnerable industry. So automatically, I would say yes, there is a lot of stress and a lot of questions that come both from the children and the parents. And I think that one of the benefits of this new structure that is very difficult to pay for, but with these smaller groups, I do think that there is an opportunity there for those conversations to happen. I think the relationship building in those small groups is amazing, and that it has the opportunity to help children have an environment where they can feel vulnerable or share these things or know that they're not going through this alone. And I think that there's a power there. I think that once we get into reopening more and more programs, as the phases through California come through and more businesses can come back to work, I think that there'll be another layer, which is children are coming back after being out of any structured program for 2 to 3 months. And I think that that's going to be a big component where just the ability, I think about, the first year of kindergarten or TK programs in that first 3 months where they're just learning how to get into a program and what the structure is. And I think that it's going to take a lot of patience on our end as providers for both parents and children, and understand that we're relearning together on what the environment is going to need for children to get up and going. So I think that there's automatically going to be some stress there. In terms of behavioral issues, I think you hit it right on the head. I think we just need to be sensitive that that's coming from a very real place at this point in time. And I think it's something that we need to consider as providers is, have we thought about those resources, not just the nuts and bolts and the papers and masks, but have we thought about our procedures, and do we have the staffing to support being able to pull children out and spend the time on the real conversations that are going to be important as we rebuild together.
Hsiao, did you want to add anything to that, or Mara?
Well, no, I agree with everything that Danny said, because the small groups really do allow for us to have those deeper conversations with children, because they're scared, and they know what's happening. They're listening to news. They're seeing their parents go out every day, and the protective gear, etc. So that's not necessarily a conversation that they can have with their parents.
Yeah.
And we're the safe space that they can have it with, because we're seeing, children who are having, bedwetting accidents at nap time, which is not typical for them. But so there's some trauma happening that needs to be addressed. And we're fortunate enough here at the YWCA to have our counseling team on site. It looks a little bit different now, because normally we could just send folks upstairs or have a counselor come downstairs, and we have those rooms with the sand tables, etc., for children's therapy. Now, because of the remote status, we do have access to some therapists that can have those conversations, but we're finding that it's just more authentic because these children are new. They don't know us. They've been with us maybe 3-4 weeks. They're still getting to know us. So even with the therapist coming in to have the conversation, the trust is built in the relationship with us seeing them every day. So they're more comfortable speaking with us than someone else coming in. But it's very real space for them, and we need to absolutely take that time to be able to process it and acknowledge their feelings. And in a small group, we can do that.
Thank you, Lucille. It really strikes me that a lot of the kids are new to your program. So those relationships with your care providers are totally new. Mara, were you going to say something else?
Well, the only thing I was going to add in what I see across the region, and Danny, we've talked about this too, just the opportunity for students in a virtual setting to connect with their leaders and with their teachers and with each other is so essential in this time of uncertainty for them, and I know that I see it within my own kids. I have 3 myself, high school, middle, and elementary, and I see it at all levels where there's a hunger and a desire to be, of course, with their friends, because we're social beings. And how does that look and feel in this new virtual environment, and really understanding how significant it is for kids to be able to connect virtually through Zoom or Google Meets or whatever, however they are able to do that with their after school leader has been just incredible way to keep connected. And maybe to address some of the feeling of isolation, which of course is, and trauma, which you both spoke of just now, and you're seeing that in your in-person environments. I just can't help but think, what is it going to be like when students do go back, if they haven't had the opportunity to interact with staff live, and they haven't had the opportunity to interact with their leaders in a virtual setting. So that's sort of a double whammy for them, and a double need for adjustment, for lack of a better word.
I'm just thinking about it's great that you're able to serve the students you're able to serve, but there's so many kids that really need this. And I want to pick on something that you were saying earlier, Danny, that there's some financial constraints here, some very serious financial impacts. Can you talk about the financial impact of the lower student ratio? How are you managing it at the YMCA?
It's very different. I think when your year stops, and for all intents and purposes, the YMCA, just as every other business, that meant that our cash flow stopped, and it really changed our business model in terms of what we're able to provide and what we can provide, what we've been able to provide in the past. And it really came down to the goal is to try to serve families that need, and how do we do that? And we've been very fortunate, as I'm sure the YWCA has been, and many of our partners, for the amazing support that we receive from our community, as well as our members who really believe in the work that's happening right now, and they'll believe in the work that's happening as more programs open up, that this is a needed thing for families, not just the ability to go to work, but the ability to have that independence, that they have control over what's going on during this time frame. And I think that we have a couple different models. we've been very fortunate to be sponsored through one hospital that has been in support of their families to ensure their employees can go to work. But we've also have a great partnership with the Morgan Hill Community Foundation and the Morgan Hill Unified School District, where in collaboration with each other, it's given us all the pieces we need to really truly not only subsidize the cost for everybody, but then on top of that, provide the financial assistance that the YMCA hadn't been able to provide on our own for this particular program. And that's one of the pieces that I've been talking about. We know the true cost for this program is much higher than a lot of our families can afford. And when you have a program serving a need, but people can't afford that need, you have a gap there. And so the partnerships are going to be really important as you really kind of figure out what the cost of the program is. But I think also ensuring that that cost can be sustainable. And that's something that we really need to look at in terms of the long-term goal. No one knew back in March how long this was going to last. I think we all saw the date and realized it's probably going to last longer than that first date that was posted. But we had no idea of how long this would last. I think to that credit, not just looking at what the cost is going to look like on paper, but also how do you make that program sustainable for as long as families need? And that's a little bit harder of a target. But I do think that as, I was kind of writing some notes out, and the way that we've approached that is truly looking at what those costs are going to be, and then looking at what our funding sources are, and really truly figuring out how long we can provide that care in what time frame is a realistic time frame, and what are the minimums that we're going to need to do that. I think that one of the other pieces that have been challenging for us, I guess, just to hop back to that question, I'm sorry to go backwards, but I think falls into this conversation, is in terms of pricing models and how you're playing with that. We have a weak cost for pricing, and we had to go back and forth and figure out, was that fair once we realized families might not be needing 5 days a week. But in that same practice, we also needed to look at, can we ask staff to come in for 1 day a week, or do we need consistency with our team to ensure that we have the staff and that they also have the opportunity to have a stable job and not have to worry if they're working or not in terms of their work. So I think that in terms of the cost, the expense is going to be the expense, and that's going to be an important part as people are opening up programs to evaluate some of the bigger questions. But I would encourage them to not just look at what it's going to take to open the program, but how, are you going to be able to run that for the duration that you're looking at, and what are your minimums at that you're going to need in order to cover your costs. And, I think the hard question is, are you committed at that point in time to either subsidize the program or not run the program if you're not able to subsidize it to what you need? And I think that's a very hard question that a lot of organizations are going through right now in terms of their summertime programs. Do we believe that we have the enrollment? And that is going to be a mixed bag. But I would say that going back to leaning on each other, I think that there is opportunity here for us to ensure that we can do what we can to serve all the kids in Silicon Valley. And sometimes that means that I might be calling Lucille and saying, hey, we don't have space, or can you help this child because I don't think that we're able to. And that's a very different, I wouldn't say it's unusual in our regular climate, but it's not the regular way that we work. And I think that if we're all in it to help children in general, realizing that help might look very different than what we propose or might look like in a regular year is an important lesson for us to all learn, because whether I'm full or maybe my price is too high, that doesn't mean that there's somebody else who can't serve that family. And I think serving the individual family should be a focus for all of us, because that's the only way we're going to make sure everyone gets taken care of.
I think all of us are mission-driven organizations. Can I ask, How are any of you or Mara, is the state changing any of its recruitment criteria to try and target the students who most need it?
Hmm. It's an excellent question, and one that there isn't a direct recruitment change, because at least with our publicly funded programs, we have always had a mission of serving the most at need. And I hate the term at risk, so I say the most at promise. And I, I think it's an extraordinarily difficult situation right now for agencies like the Y, and I mean both Ys, YWYM, just because if you are a recipient of public dollars, for example, we have some built-in flexibility to use those dollars to serve the children of essential workers. And yet when you look at the cost for running and maintaining and sustaining a program, you really need the revenue that comes from providing a program, an open program where you can charge a little bit of a fee. Mm-hmm. So the state definitely, I think, wants us all to be very aware of the needs of foster and homeless youth in particular, and those are certainly priorities. And I would say we need to also be mindful of our children of essential workers. And, that's not just our first responders and our healthcare professionals, it's also our grocery store workers. And in the region that I'm in, we are in the heart of Salinas Valley. And we've got a lot of agricultural families who need support. And I would say the same is true in Santa Clara County, South Santa Clara County. We've got a lot of farm families. And so how are we helping those families, and how are we helping those children? So requirement wise, it hasn't changed. I think it goes back to, again, us all putting our heads together to figure out how are we able to reach out to those families and serve those families who need it the most. In light of the fact that we've got to balance being able to sustain ourselves as organizations as well. So I get that dichotomy. Yeah.
Lucille, looked like you were going to say something.
No, just echoing both those sentiments. It's, how do you serve the children who need it the most versus balancing that budget? And it's just going to be, that's just the way it lands. Fortunately, for us here at the YWCA, we're able to keep our state contracts. We've got a lot of alternative pay folks. But like Danny, we've also got a contract with Santa Clara County that allows us to pay for their employees at a reduced rate because it is a county, but those dollars offset some of our school age programs because families can't afford that. I'm an essential worker, but I'm a grocery store worker, or I work at a gas station. And so I have to go to work, but I can't afford your weekly rate. So in-house, we're now building in subsidies because the ones who need it the most are the ones who can't afford it. So we're just having to end the year and say, it is what it is. It's about the service that we provide. And we're going to put this program at a loss, which I've never heard my CFO say, but those were the words that came out of her mouth. So it's really about being on mission and being able to help each other out. If I'm too expensive, can I refer them to Danny's program? Are you cheaper than I am? Or even like the week camps, moving to 3 days a week or 2 days a week, and then trying to balance those families out with someone who can afford 3 days a week and someone who can do 2 to make up a full week. So we're having to think outside the box on how we do this, but also make sure that everyone has access, to the care. So
I love your flexibility. Go ahead, Danny.
I'm sorry, you just reminded me of something. I think that there's also another opportunity as more businesses come back in the phases that relate to them. All businesses are in the same boat, which is they need their employees to get back to work in order to ensure that they can go ahead and get started. And I think that there's a perfect cross-section between our sector and the business sector there, because there's the same interests that we have. And I think that, and this is very much on an individual organization level and individual level, in terms of, looking at businesses as partners and seeing if those contracts that we have in the county to look at purchasing packages so that families can get the care that they need and they can bring their workers back. I think that's a great opportunity for organizations to reach out to those companies that they have close relationships to, because there's a shared common goal there, which is to ensure that when their employees go to work, that's what they're focused in on, and they're not worried about where their child is or the safety of the child. And that's the normalcy that parents are used to. And I do think, and I just want to point out, I think there's a great opportunity as we all get back to our programs to look at what partnerships mean and what they might look like and how that might be a little bit different than what we've seen in the previous time frame.
Perfect, Daniel. I have one last question I'd like to throw out to the group here. Now, let's think forward. Let's look to the fall. Now, workplaces, families, out-of-school time providers, we've always worked around the school day schedules. But now they're going to have to, school districts are going to have to adhere to the same class size limits. And they're talking about staggered school days or alternative school days. This is going to have a huge implication on working parents and the businesses who want the working parents to come back to their office. So for working parents who need a place to enroll their kids, does this open an opportunity for us, or does it make it even harder?
I think it's an exciting opportunity actually for us. The silver lining in all of this, I believe, and Lucille and Danny, you can definitely counter me and say absolutely not. But I just feel like we have an extraordinary opportunity to collaborate and think outside the box. And so when we get back to normal, which we won't be going back to any normal, moving forward is an opportunity for us to really think about our programming and our out of school time space in a completely different way. So if we were to stagger schedules, for example, there may be AM programs. We've heard of that before school programs running at 7 o'clock in the morning. Well, this might be 7 to noon or 8 to noon. And that's a very viable out of school time in which we have some flexibility and an opportunity to be creative and be innovative. And the same would be true still for after school. So I think the key piece is going to be having the flexibility to create and to innovate. And as Danny was mentioning, the opportunities for new partnerships and new ways of looking at the type of programming and learning that we want to see happen, not only in an in-school setting, but out of school time as well. Right. And so I see the silver lining as being very exciting. Let's, this is our opportunity to reinvent, right? So let's do that, because that's certainly what is going to happen in the future, at least from my perspective. I think these two are going to be better able to answer the impact relative to your day-to-day operations. But I'm hopeful that I can help be a thought partner in that and learn from you as well.
Yeah, Lucille?
I'd be excited to move that through, because it allows us to bridge the gap from what our students are currently experiencing. They're at home. So if we've got this staggered school day, then some of their classes may be in Zoom, which is what we're offering now in our programs, because they have to do their virtual learning. So it would be the best of both worlds from Lucille's perspective. They get to be in a structured environment, they get to be with us, but there's still the connect with their colleagues, their students, their friends. So I'd be interested to explore those possibilities. And
so Lucille, let me just understand. So you have students who would be at a YWCA facility who are now engaging through distance learning with their classes, but they're still physically at the YWCA. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's what we have right now.
Okay.
because the students still have a course load. So they're doing Zoom and in-class instruction, and then they're still with us. But if we are moving towards a staggered school space, then, you know, when they're starting school later, they need that care in the morning, and we do morning care just like we do after school care. So it's just a matter of being flexible in how we adjust those hours out. But at the end of the day, we're really here to support the children and support the families and what our community at large look like. So I really think there's going to be a lot of collaboration with other organizations in ways that we not necessarily haven't even thought about or done. We're just going to need all of everyone's brain power to kind of push some of these things through.
Go ahead, Danny.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think they both said it so well. You know, as I was mentioning before, I think that I think it's an opportunity for us to move out of these silos that we've gotten ourselves into for such a long time, just because we know what needs to happen. And the unknown is very scary. So I don't want to downplay the challenges and the hardships that might come up with the change of this sort, both for our families as well as our staff, and of course the schools themselves. But I do think that there's an amazing opportunity, and I think it comes at a good time for our industry as well. The reality is, for youth development, you know, we were getting pretty. It was getting to be a very competitive job market in the after-school world, and I think I could speak for most organizations to say that ensuring that we had enough staff previous to this particular piece was a challenge. The ability, and this is very much a silver lining, and I know there's some that might not see it in the same way that I do, the ability to open up the opportunity. You know, if you take our regular after school leader who might be in college and they're taking courses in the morning and they go and they work their job in the afternoon. You know, we've had to let people go, or people, we haven't had to let people go. They've decided to leave because they have afternoon classes and we don't have an opportunity for them to switch out. And so I think on a very simple scale, this might give us the access to more staff, more flexibility for our staff to ensure that they have a well-rounded time. I also think that one of the things that people don't remember is that the majority of programs run all year round. And so many of our staff are used to working an 11-hour day or an 8-hour day within an 11-hour time frame. And so there are many of us as community organizations that have the experience on what the pacing will look like in order to run staff or program for a very extended long period of time. And that's what we do during the summertime. And it might have a different focus and there might be kids moving in and out, but I think there's a lot that as we work with our school partners and our community partners, there's a lot of knowledge in the Valley. And, you know, I think that it's a perfect time for us to collect it and really look at how do we make this work in a way that works for everybody. And I think that's an opportunity I'm excited for. I would say that's the biggest opportunity. Okay. Sometimes we have opportunities for things to look good for the Y, or maybe it's for the school district, or maybe it's for the state. But this truly is a good time to reset, to look at what is the opportunity that looks great for all of us. And I didn't see a natural point in that happening. So again, silver lining. And I know that it sounds a lot easier than what I presented, but just want to share that.
Well, so as a trustee, what would you like school districts? What should I report back to school districts to share with you? Has any school district reached out to you to begin to discuss this potential scenario? And if not, what information would you like a school district to share with you in order to bust this silo and be more collaborative?
I can start. I have had conversations with many of our school districts, and you know, I think it's an interesting time because I think that the question isn't, you know, where do we fall into your plan? It's, you know, how can we be part of that plan? And I think right now, the biggest piece, and to answer your question, it's just what partners do we need at the table in order to make the best decision for our community? I would say that that would be my ask to all school districts, regardless of who their partner might be on that campus. But in truth, how do we really look at this in a holistic way for the community, and so that in under different lenses, and how do we involve the right people as part of those conversations? In my conversations, I had no expectation that the school district would know when they start school or what their schedule is going to be.
Yeah.
We ask the questions knowing very well, and them knowing that I need to ask the question. But I think that the nicest thing for me really was the interactions where it was just the conversation on, how can we help, and how do we be part of the solution, and can you would you be comfortable reaching out to us as you're discussing, so we can figure out, maybe we can help in some way, and that conversation I think is going to need to happen at all of our schools across Santa Clara County, to really trying to figure this out. And it might look different at different school districts, but we'll learn from each other. So I definitely would say that in addition to the parents and the community itself, the partner organizations would love to be part of that solution, because I think that we have additional resources that we can help each one of those school communities.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, I think this, as I said, the 6-county Bay Area collaboration will be coming out with a framework. They've told me it will come out by the end of this week. So I think at that point, individual districts will start trying to finalize what their school day schedules were like, start talking with their collective bargaining units to see what kind of hours people are willing to work. And at that point, I think, if I were in Silicon Valley or in Santa Clara County, I'd be coming to you all and trying to, just come as a partner. And I loved how you framed it, Daniel. Just how can we all work together to make this happen?
And Rod, the only thing I think I would add, because Danny did say it beautifully, is just being as proactive as we possibly can. Because I think that even though we don't know exactly what's happening, I think we have a pretty good sense of what the plan A, B, and C is going to maybe look like. And so if we can begin to start having those conversations now before a plan is created and then we come in, as Danny said, that is really the key piece, is seeing all of us as partners in this, along with all the skills and the resources that we have. There's also probably further community connections and partners we can also bring on board, and not to overwhelm, but just to start those conversations now before the real planning begins, because it could create a very generative process of really some good thinking around what does the future of education look like going into the fall. And it could look very different than the traditional classrooms that we're accustomed to because of the experience we've had in this space. And we have so much to give and offer just through our experience with that. So that's my hope is that that message can be carried forward to all of the districts and all of the boards and trustees. And so thank you for being a messenger and an advocate for us, because I think that's truly what it takes, is to have somebody saying, hey, you got to reach out to your expanded learning program and make sure they have a seat at the table, so that they can at least hear what's happening. They can help to be a part of that solution before you've created a finalized plan. Being proactive is key.
Yes. If you want to have a real partner, you have to give them some lead time. You have to give them necessary information. Lucille, do you have any final words to bring us home?
No, I think they both did a fabulous job. But just to sort of sum up the point is, what we do need a seat at that table, at least to be invited to it or to hear what we're saying, because what the school district decides has a direct impact on the services that we provide. So if we get in in the planning stages, if we get ahead of it, then there's less cleanup on the back end. So it's just, it would make sense to have a meeting prior to actually putting something in stone.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank all of you for both your strength, your courage, your resiliency. I hear a lot of visionary comments coming from all of you, but also deep empathy for the families that you're serving. So I think, frankly, I feel more optimistic now than I have been before. And I want to thank you for sharing your learnings, but also looking around the corner for what's going to be coming in the fall, and your flexibility to try and make it work for working families and other providers out there too, who want to come alongside you and serve more kids. So thank you very much, and we'll look forward to continuing the conversation in future meetings.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.